When people talk about bikes becoming illegal, it sounds dramatic. But the reality is more complicated and honestly more frustrating than some sweeping ban. We're looking at 12 motorcycles that could face serious registration and compliance problems in 2026. Not because lawmakers hate old bikes, but because emissions enforcement is tightening and the gaps in documentation are catching up with owners. If you own any of these or you're thinking about buying one, drop a comment and let me know if your state is already giving you trouble or if you think this is all overblown. First on the list, Honda CB500T. These were built from 1975 to 76, which puts them right before the EPA established emission regulations in 78. Federal certification labels don't exist on most units because the certification process wasn't invented yet when these rolled off the line. Honda met the standards that existed at the time, then the standards changed after the fact. A lot of these bikes came into the country decades later as restoration projects from Europe and Asia, and the import paperwork either went missing or was never filed properly to begin with. Registration offices are starting to ask for proof of emissions compliance on anything pre-78. And the CB500T has no catalytic converter, no vapor control, and no documentation in EPA records to fall back on. Parts availability through classic Honda suppliers holds up reasonably well, but original exhaust components and carburetor jets are getting harder to track down. Most owners put maybe 2,000 miles a year on them at best. Performance-wise, the 498cc parallel twin delivers smooth operation until you push past 5,000 RPM, then vibration shows up and doesn't leave. Power output is mild enough for weekend riding but nothing close to sport performance. The bike itself works fine mechanically, but documentation gaps create legal exposure that has nothing to do with how the motorcycle actually runs or whether it's safe. If enforcement tightens, owners face a choice between limiting use to collector exemptions or fighting registration denials that stem from paperwork problems rather than real compliance issues. Second, Yamaha XS650. What threatens this bike's legal status isn't what Yamaha designed, but what owners have done to it over the years. The 653cc air-cooled parallel twin ran from 1968 through 85 and originally met early noise standards, though it never had much in the way of modern emission equipment. Straight pipes and pod filters are everywhere in the XS650 community because customization is practically built into ownership. Those modifications strip away whatever minimal emissions control existed from the factory. Cafe racers, bobbers, and scramblers dominate the used market to the point where finding a stock example is genuinely difficult. DIY maintenance attracts people who can handle valve adjustments and carburetor synchronization with basic tools, and the torque delivery works fine for city use, even if the vibration gets brutal on longer rides. Gray market imports from Japan add complications because non-US VIN patterns raise questions during title transfers. Emissions labels are missing on most units, especially modified builds where custom work eliminated factory exhaust and lighting systems that were required for compliance. If you're running a modified XS650, there's a decent chance you're already non-compliant and just haven't been called on it yet because enforcement has been inconsistent. Registration renewals are starting to require proof of emissions equipment, and bikes without proper labels face rejection. Most custom examples would fail inspection immediately if standards were applied uniformly, while owners who kept stock configurations maintain better legal positioning for now. Coming in at number 3, Suzuki GS550. Suzuki built this 549cc air-cooled inline-4 from 1977 through 86, and early models were part of Suzuki's first real push into emissions tuning, though compliance records for specific VINs are either incomplete or missing entirely. European and Canadian imports arrived without proper lighting conversions, so you'll find speedometers displaying kilometers instead of miles per hour, which registration offices flag immediately. There's no certified catalyst and no air injection system, so if you tested one against current standards, it would fail without question. Performance-wise, charging system failures happen enough that owners just expect them, and oil seepage shows up on units that have been sitting. Carburetor synchronization takes patience and usually multiple attempts to get right. What makes things worse is how common it is to find these bikes built from mixed parts, where frames and engines from different units got combined during rebuilds. DMV databases catch these when VINs get cross-checked. New restorers like the balanced power and mild performance, but electrical systems don't age well and the charging components are a known weak point. Stock examples run smooth when everything's working. Finding a completely unmodified GS550 takes real effort because most have replacement engines, swapped parts, or missing compliance documentation that makes proving anything nearly impossible. States with thorough registration processes already turn these bikes away. And if enforcement spreads, daily use becomes impractical regardless of whether you're holding a clean title. Number 4. Kawasaki Z1 and KZ900. Municipal noise ordinances in major cities set limits that stock exhaust on these bikes exceeds by a comfortable margin, sitting around 90 to 92 decibels. The 903cc air-cooled inline-4 was produced from 73 through 76, before EPA certification processes existed, so there's no emissions label or compliance documentation anywhere on them. Import channels bring these in as vintage collector bikes with limited-use titles, which is a category some jurisdictions are looking to tighten or restrict. Linear power delivery feels quick until you need to stop, at which point the braking performance by current standards becomes immediately obvious. Enthusiast communities keep parts available, and full restorations happen regularly enough that you can find clean examples. Engine durability holds up across decades if you maintain them, but stock exhaust and carburetors will never meet modern emission standards, no matter what you do. Heavy weight combined with heat output makes traffic riding uncomfortable at best. Most owners already operate under antique insurance with limited-use plates that restrict annual mileage. Non-conforming lighting and brake components add another layer beyond just emissions. Future regulations could push antique exemptions toward show-only use rather than public roads, which would eliminate road access for many current Z1 owners. Retrofitting compliance equipment is impractical given what the bike is. Enforcement strictness varies by location, with urban areas that have noise ordinances already restricting these bikes, while rural jurisdictions may not care. Federal harmonization of antique vehicle rules could remove exemptions that currently exist at state level. At number 5, Triumph Bonneville. The 650 to 750cc parallel twins built from 59 through 77 in the UK carry pre-EPA specifications with British export paperwork that lacks the conformity statements current import processes require. Service work is straightforward if you're comfortable with British engineering quirks and accept that maintaining one of these means dealing with ongoing small issues rather than modern reliability. Re-imported classics arrive without emissions proof or lighting compliance documentation, and emissions data plates are missing on most units. Oil leaks are part of ownership, not an exception. Lucas Electrical Systems earned the nickname Prince of Darkness through decades of consistent failures, and vibration levels are significant even by vintage twin standards. There's no catalytic converter, no vapor control, and no realistic path to meeting modern standards without rebuilding the bike into something fundamentally different from what it is. Stock units without modern upgrades struggle with even minimal emission and safety benchmarks. The enthusiast base is aging, and daily riders are becoming uncommon. Most states classify these as antiques, which works fine until regulations potentially restrict that designation to show-only vehicles without public road privileges. That change would formalize what many Bonneville owners already practice, since these function better as preservation projects than practical transportation. Compliance retrofitting makes no economic or practical sense given what you'd need to change. The bikes represent a specific historical period with different engineering priorities, and attempting to force modern compliance onto them misses the point of what they are. Number 6. Beta R-series. These were designed for competition and sold with EPA competition exemptions for off-highway use, which means adding mirrors and turn signals doesn't change what they fundamentally are. The RR390, 430, and 480 Enduro models from Italy carry VIN codes that indicate off-road classification, and registration databases that cross-check these codes deny road plates when the VINs don't match street-legal categories. Lightweight and agility work well on technical terrain, which is what they were built for. Street conversions happen frequently because people want to ride them on roads, but those conversions are almost always incomplete because owners install lighting kits, horns, and mirrors, while the underlying emission equipment remains missing. Full EPA on-highway certification doesn't exist for most of these bikes, and emission control hardware is either inconsistent or completely absent, depending on the specific model. Maintenance follows race bike schedules with oil changes every 15 hours and valve checks every 30 to 40 hours, which limits practical use as a commuter, even if you could somehow keep one legal. Service intervals and parts costs exceed standard dual sport expenses. Many jurisdictions already deny dual sport titles for these bikes, and national VIN database harmonization would eliminate whatever registration pathways still exist in lenient states. Beta built these for racing environments, and some owners tried to bypass restrictions by getting them titled in states with less thorough verification. That loophole is closing as systems modernize and cross-state VIN recognition improves. Bikes titled years ago may face renewal problems as databases catch up to classifications that were missed initially. Coming in at number 7, Husqvarna TE and FE series. 2 product lines exist from the manufacturer, and your VIN determines which category you're in. Street-legal versions received proper certification while competition-only versions did not. A digit 3 or letter A in a specific VIN position marks the bike as off-road only, and DMV computers in multiple states reject these during standard verification. Registration renewals are getting denied when these VINs get flagged. Some owners register them in jurisdictions with less thorough VIN verification and then operate them elsewhere, but that loophole is closing as database synchronization improves. Only models carrying an S designation in their model codes received street approval from regulators. Competition exemptions that allowed off-road bikes to be sold without full emission controls could narrow further, and states could start enforcing VIN-type restrictions more uniformly. Bikes holding valid registrations currently might face denial during renewal attempts as enforcement becomes more consistent. On the bike itself, lightweight and torque work well on technical terrain, which makes sense given that build quality improved significantly after KTM acquired the brand. Maintenance schedules follow race bike intervals, with top-end rebuilds becoming necessary after 200 hours of hard use. Service requirements are tight and expensive. Parts cost more than comparable dual sport models. The race-tuned versions lack catalytic converters and emission sensors entirely. Geographic advantages may disappear as cross-state VIN recognition increases. What worked for titling 5 years ago doesn't work now, and what works now may not work in 2 years. Database synchronization between states would eliminate the inconsistency that some owners currently exploit, and non-approved VINs could be purged from registration systems entirely. 8th on the list, Sherco Enduro and Supermoto models. The 250 SER, 300 SEF, and 450 SEF factory reach American buyers through competition distributors rather than standard retail channels, because that's what they are: competition bikes. Street approval documentation is limited or absent depending on specific variants. VINs classify these as off-road motorcycles, and EPA records don't include them. Mirrors, turn signals, and emission equipment required for street use are absent from factory specifications because they were never meant to meet those requirements. Registration attempts fail in jurisdictions that verify VIN classifications against databases. Buyers either understood these limitations at purchase or discovered them later when trying to register or renew. Competition exemptions allowed them to be sold without meeting street vehicle standards, and those exemptions specifically prohibit road use. In reality, dealer networks across the US are sparse, and parts ship from Europe with lead times stretching into weeks or months. Maintenance demands precision and happens frequently. Engines operate at high RPM and produce noise levels that make street riding beyond short distances uncomfortable. Weight stays low, and handling remains sharp on trails and technical sections, which is exactly what they were designed for. Most current owners already treat them as off-road bikes. Enforcement formalization would simply make official what already happens in practice for most cases. Current street riders operate in areas with minimal VIN scrutiny or haven't faced complications yet. Tighter enforcement won't create new problems. It will just make official what the regulations already state. The bikes were never designed for street use, and attempting to register them as street legal contradicts their purpose and certification status. Number 9. Harley-Davidson Sportster XL 883 and XL 1200. Pre-2006 models came with carbureted engines and minimal emission controls. 2006 brought fuel injection with catalytic converters, which means everything built before that year lacks any kind of closed-loop emission management. Here's where it gets messy. Modification rates are extremely high, and custom work is embedded in the ownership culture. Finding one that's actually stock is harder than finding modified examples. Aftermarket exhausts and loud pipes are practically standard equipment. Open intake systems replace factory air boxes frequently enough that it's considered normal. These changes remove factory emission controls that were marginal to begin with. EPA tampering regulations permit penalties for altered emission systems, and registration can be denied when factory compliance stickers are missing or removed during rebuilds. Sound levels regularly exceed 80 decibels on modified units, and inspection programs in some jurisdictions actually measure this and fail bikes that exceed limits. Riding one? Mechanical simplicity and durability are valued characteristics. Entry-level pricing made these popular first Harleys for decades. Ground clearance is limited, ride quality is firm, and cornering ability is restricted, but those are accepted characteristics. The bikes themselves function properly as mechanical devices. Active enforcement programs fail modified units during checks where such programs exist, though many jurisdictions don't check at all, which creates geographic advantages that may not last. If enforcement expands beyond current pockets, modified bikes could receive off-road-only classifications that prohibit street and highway use. Modification culture created widespread compliance violations that enforcement mostly ignored until now. Ignored violations are still violations, and stricter application of existing rules would impact large numbers of Sportsters currently on public roads. Number 10. Royal Enfield Classic 350. Official U.S. sales began in 2018 with certified models that meet all federal requirements, but before that, independent importers were bringing in non-certified Classic 350s and Bullets from India with incorrect VIN prefixes. These gray market imports lack proper federal certification. Non-U.S. variants skip equipment like vapor control systems and diagnostic connectors that are required here. Import paperwork was often filed incorrectly or not at all, which creates problems years later when someone tries to transfer title or renew registration. Registration offices are starting to flag these VINs during routine checks as databases improve. Some units have speedometers showing kilometers instead of miles per hour, and lighting doesn't meet federal beam standards. Documentation problems pile up when bikes change hands multiple times without proper records following them. The bike itself? Simple and retro with easy maintenance that appeals to beginners and riders who value simplicity. The single-cylinder engine makes around 20 horsepower, which is fine for short commutes or weekend rides, but nothing more. Smooth at low speeds and forgiving to ride. Gray imports often lack parts support since the official dealer network won't touch non-certified units. Oil seepage is common on older examples. Bolts come loose regularly, and vibration above 60 miles per hour gets tiring fast. These were popular in developing markets where simplicity and low cost matter more than performance or refinement. Official 2022 and newer models sold through Royal Enfield's U.S. dealers are fully compliant and face no issues. Older gray imports risk becoming unregisterable if VINs fail database checks or get flagged during title transfers. Current owners with clean titles in lenient states may be fine until they try to sell or move to a stricter jurisdiction. Number 11. BMW R-series airheads. These include the R75/5, R90/6, and R100 RS built from 1969 through 96. Pre-catalyst, pre-diagnostic systems, open-loop carbureted design from an era when emissions control meant something completely different than it does now. Large numbers were imported from Europe under the 25-year exemption rule, which doesn't currently require federal certification, but future revisions could change that. Non-US headlight and speedometer units don't meet federal standards for markings or brightness. No vapor control system or secondary air injection exists on these bikes because they predate those requirements by decades. If regulators revoke legacy exemptions or tighten existing rules, on-road legality could depend solely on antique status rather than actual street use. Registration scrutiny is increasing for imports that lack proper documentation even when the bikes are decades old and mechanically sound. On the road, engines regularly exceed 100,000 miles with proper maintenance, and some go much further than that. Shaft drive eliminates chain maintenance entirely, and low center of gravity makes them solid touring machines for long distances. Valve adjustments and clutch service can be done by owners with basic mechanical skills and common tools. Parts remain widely available through BMW's classic division and aftermarket suppliers. Simple, durable, and reliable if you stay on top of maintenance. Pre-1990 airheads. Airheads will never meet modern emission standards, no matter what modifications you attempt. The bikes are mechanically sound and many will outlast their owners, but compliance isn't achievable. If regulators tighten enforcement on legacy exemptions, owners face restrictions on where and how they can ride. Antique status might protect them for show use or limited recreational riding, but could eliminate daily commuting. Geographic location determines risk more than the bike's actual condition. Last but not least, KTM XC series. Two product lines exist, street legal and competition only, and which version you have determines everything. Street legal trims carry proper federal certification and all required equipment, while competition models lack it entirely by design. Models with competition-only labels that explicitly state "not for highway use" trigger DMV denials immediately when checked. The missing equipment isn't minor either. Race-tuned versions lack vapor control systems and emission equipment that street versions have from the factory. Some states with strict enforcement have already denied registration for competition versions when they surface during transfers. A possible 2026 update from federal regulators could narrow competition exemptions further and close existing gaps. If state and federal databases sync up nationwide or regulators limit competition exemptions more broadly, non-certified models could lose registration renewals even if they're already titled and currently legal. Performance-wise, street legal models are highly regarded among dual sport riders for good reason. Trail capability is strong, and they handle technical terrain well. Race-tuned versions deliver essentially the same performance, but without emission control equipment that adds weight. Service needs are high, with frequent oil changes and valve checks required to maintain reliability. Reliability holds up well for off-road use when maintained properly according to racing schedules. Most of these bikes won't disappear overnight. Enforcement varies wildly depending on where you live. Some states are already cracking down on system checks and emissions documentation, while others barely look twice at what you're registering. If you own one of these bikes, you're probably not losing it tomorrow. Most of this comes down to where you live and whether your state actually checks what you're riding. The real risk is getting caught in the middle of a title transfer or renewal when systems suddenly flag something they ignored for years. Competition bikes that were never street legal are the most exposed, but even vintage bikes with missing paperwork could face issues if enforcement tightens. The bigger question is whether federal enforcement tightens across the board or if this stays a patchwork of state-level enforcement that some riders can still navigate around. Save this list, somewhere you can find it when you're bike shopping. And if this helped you dodge a problem, share it with someone who needs to see it. See you in the next video.